Sometimes a series goes on for a long time, so long that the creator or creators think it's time to shake things up a bit with the introduction of a new main character. More often than not, this is a bold decision because, obviously, fans are likely going to be very attached to the original protagonist. Even in cases where that character has a full and complete character arc with nothing left to do, fans might still be hesitant to let them go. This puts the prospective new main character in a precarious position, because they need to make a very good first impression if they want to win over the devout lovers of the protagonist who came before. Some games do a pretty poor job of it. Sometimes the new main character comes off as too boring, uninteresting, or less charismatic than their predecessor. Or they're too much of an asshole anti-hero in a story that doesn't really need one. There are some instances where writers try way too hard to assign depth to their new main character, and it blows up in their face and paradoxically ends up feeling manipulative and two-dimensional. In some cases, the new main character is created to go against the original main character, who is painted like a villain, which a lot of people won't play along with just on principle, regardless of how understandable their motives may be. Or the new main character is designed to be a total replacement for the old one, which almost never feels necessary, especially if the old one has been around for only a few installments and still has potential for more. Basically, there's a lot of ways things can go south. But what about the successes? What are franchises that introduce a new main character so well that most, if not all, fans seem to be on their side since moment one? Or, at the very least, the character was able to somewhat quickly turn an unfavorable initial reaction around completely. First off, let me just say right now that this video is going to use mostly video game examples, because that's what my channel pretty much covers. But the spirit of what I'm saying applies to basically any narrative form. Movies, TV shows, comics, books, you name it. I have a few examples that stand out to me personally because they're my favorite franchises, so seeing them succeed in the main character switch was actually a really big deal for me. But before I get into them, I want to set the mood here by offering an example that a lot of you might already be familiar with, and it doesn't come from a game. It actually comes from an anime. I know I just said I would rely on video games, but there is a reason I'm bringing up this specific anime example. It's personally very important to me, because it basically shaped my expectations regarding this very idea back when I was a kid. This anime had a character introduction so shocking, yet so memorable and badass, it struck me with a specific type of awe and wonder that only a few other introductions have made me feel since. And that character is Trunks in Dragon Ball Z. Now granted, he's not the main character, but he was very important to the Android saga. And his first appearance was something that shook little kid me to the very core. If you've seen it, you probably don't need me to reiterate what happens, but I'm gonna do it anyway. Frieza miraculously survives the destruction of planet Namek and eventually makes his way to Earth to exact his revenge on all the Z fighters waiting for the return of Goku, who also managed to escape doom. Frieza is the first to arrive, accompanied by his father, King Cold, and instead of another huge, long climactic fight, he is stopped by a mysterious, sword-wielding teenager named Trunks, who confidently boasts that he will be the one to kill Frieza. He claims he can turn Super Saiyan, and if you were watching these episodes as they were new, you would absolutely think he was bluffing. But he does it. He gathers the power to turn Super Saiyan, and if you weren't already aware of his origins and future plot details, then this completely goes against the information you have, because at this point in the story, the only Saiyans around, not including any movies, should be Goku, Vegeta, and Gohan, who is half Saiyan as the son of Goku. What proceeds after the transformation is nothing short of incredible. Trunks absolutely trounces Frieza in a single episode, and I mean trounces. Trunks basically plays with his food before effortlessly slicing Frieza into mincemeat with his sword, and then blasting him away into dust. If you watched these episodes as they first came out over 20 years ago, then you're blown away. because only about 15 or so episodes ago, Frieza was the #1 most threatening and dangerous villain the series has ever had, and it took almost 30 episodes for him to be beaten on Namek. But not this time. Trunks came out of nowhere, turned Super Saiyan in an instant, and utterly massacres Frieza, King Cold, and their platoon of soldiers with insulting ease. Little 9-year-old me was totally flabbergasted. It felt like something that wasn't supposed to happen, happened. Like some sort of major storytelling rule was just broken in front of my eyes. In a matter of minutes, Trunks appeared out of thin air and became the coolest motherfucker in Dragon Ball. I bring this up because ever since I witnessed this, Trunks has more or less been my personal barometer for measuring how effective a new character's introduction actually is. His appearance was extremely efficient at getting viewers invested in him as a person, because he carried himself confidently, immediately displayed abilities not seen before to back up that confidence, and had a certain level of mystery behind him that made us want to learn more about him. Also, and this is arguably the most important detail, Trunks was not designed to be a replacement for any of the other Saiyans. This is what makes his introduction so good. He quickly established all the traits that made him different from the other main characters, but he never tried to steal the spotlight, because he didn't need to. The viewers wanted to know more about him strictly out of their own sense of curiosity. The show didn't try to force us to be intrigued by him. We were intrigued on our own. This is something that some other main character switches fail at. They just throw some new dude in front of your face who has only a fraction of the charisma or intrigue, then say, this is the new protagonist now, and kinda just expect you to like them automatically. Sometimes, out of desperation, the story will constantly put them up against overwhelming odds to squeeze sympathy out of us, but it falls flat. Worst case scenario, the results do the opposite. It makes the viewer resentful of the character because of how inorganic it all feels. This is another non-video game example, but if you watch professional wrestling, then the entire babyface run of Roman Reigns is a good demonstration of that. So, in this video, I want to go over new main character introductions in video games that I like the most. Obviously, this is a very personal list, so I'm not going to cover characters I'm not familiar with, but this is actually a good opportunity for you to participate and tell me other main characters not mentioned in this video that you also like the introduction of, in video games or otherwise. Now, my first example is also the most recent one, and believe it or not, it's a new main character that I always believed would land, because the introduction of this guy was actually announced in advance, and that guy is Ichiban Kasuga, from the Like a Dragon franchise. He was first introduced in Like a Dragon Online, which is a collectible card game spin-off and only available in Japan, but he was brought over to the main series with Like a Dragon 7. And with him was a major gameplay change to the series, turning it from a real-time beat-em-up to a turn-based RPG, because Ichiban is canonically a fan of Dragon Quest. When Ryuga Gotoku Studio first stated they were going to be giving the series to a new main character, some people were understandably hesitant, because Kiryu is a favorite. It's absolutely not a hot take to say that. Everyone loves him. But I knew RGG Studio was going to do a good job introducing Ichiban, because right out the gate, they made it clear that while Ichiban is the new leading man, he was not necessarily meant to be a replacement for Kiryu, which would end up being true in multiple ways because Kiryu himself would also be a very crucial figure in Ichiban's adventures, and they would develop a very believable friendship between themselves. Ichiban has an excellent mix of similarities and differences from Kiryu. They both have similar beginnings, with both men going to prison for another person in their introductory game, and they are both orphans. The situations they go through in life are comparable, but personality-wise, the way they handle these situations are wildly different. In fact, their difference in demeanor is even portrayed visually through their clothes. They both wear shades of red and light gray or white, but which articles of clothing are colored which are inverted. Kiryu is always seen as the more calm, collected, and stoic type. He is a true blue, hard-assed yakuza tough guy, but Ichiban wears his emotions on his sleeve far more often. He's openly and loudly happy, angry, or sad. Ichiban is also a bit more impulsive and a little bit more airheaded. He's a more animated and sometimes downright cartoonish character who occupies the same dark, dreary underworld that Kiryu exists in. And yet the story manages to make the most of his presence all the same. Kiryu experiences cartoonish moments in his own games, but the humor comes from how out of place he seems, whereas the humor with Ichiban comes with how much he fits. Basically, the two men occupy the same setting and share similar morals, but their highly contrasting personalities lead them to solving their problems in extremely different ways. Because of this, both characters can coexist peacefully, both literally in the story and figuratively in the eyes of fans. Because, as I stated earlier, it's obvious that Ichiban was never meant to be a replacement for Kiryu in the strictest sense of the word. RGG Studio respects both characters and the legacies they leave behind. Now, I could go on to the next franchise I want to talk about, but I'd be remiss in not mentioning the fact that the Like a Dragon series has a pretty long history of excellent new main character introductions on top of Ichiban. Personally, I also really like Akiyama's intro in Yakuza 4, making him look like an aloof and almost apathetic loan shark when in fact he's far more invested and altruistic than he may seem, and also far more clever to boot. His laid-back, one-day-at-a-time demeanor really makes him stand out among all the other major characters in the series. But the one introduction that everyone loves the most, even more than Ichiban's, is actually a bit of a cheat for this video because this character is technically not new, but it was their first time being playable in the mainline series. Of course, I'm talking about the Mad Dog of Shimano, Goro Majima, in Yakuza 0. His introduction in this game is widely considered to be arguably the best in gaming, and if you've played it, then you understand why. In less than 15 minutes, Majima displays an unmatched level of charisma, skill, professionalism, and badassery that other protagonists would need an entire game, sometimes multiple, to build for themselves. The game pulls this off by making his introductory scene involve a conflict that takes place in a setting that he has total control over. An unruly customer makes a scene at Majima's club, but no one does anything to stop the man because they know he will come out soon and handle it. Before we even see Majima's face, some other characters speak of his reputation, referring to him as the Lord of the Night. Right off the bat, he has huge expectations to live up to simply based on how others perceive him, and he follows that up by blowing those expectations out of the water. Maintaining a calm but still clearly sardonic demeanor, he plays the part of a manager who treats customers like royalty, even drunk buffoons. When the troublemaker starts to physically lash out, Majima dodges with almost inhuman finesse, eventually turning the entire situation around by not only convincing the customer to relax without laying a finger on him, but also manipulating him into spending an exorbitant amount of money while wording it in such a way to make the customer look good despite his poor behavior. Most people probably expected Majima to just come out and swiftly spank some ass, but no. He subverts expectations in an amazing way by killing the rowdy drunk with kindness instead. And all of this is bolstered by the excellent presentation of the club itself, with its stylish design and big band playing music in the background of all the mayhem. Yakuza 0 features both Majima and Kiryu as lead characters, but even so, it's no wonder that some fans consider it to be Majima's game first and foremost. And it's due in no small part to how amazing his introduction is at setting up his character so effectively in so little time. Speaking of introductions, if you weren't already aware, I'd like to introduce you to the merch store I recently opened. As of right now, I have 2 shirt designs, one of which is a tribute to Hironobu Sakaguchi, creator of the Final Fantasy series. I also have a beanie with my logo embroidered on it. Both shirt designs are available in lightweight fabric and heavyweight cotton. I've already ordered samples of everything for quality checking, and I can confirm they look great in person. If you're interested, visit mildconviction.com or check the store tab of my YouTube channel page. Thank you for listening, now let's get back to the video. My next favorite main character introduction takes us back a bit further. Granted, there was a bit of hesitance about the direction of this game's story, specifically the really poor attempt at making the previous main character look like a villain in promotional material, but not the actual story, to drum up hype. But thankfully, things turned out for the best. I'm talking about Nero from Devil May Cry. Dante, the original main character, was front and center for the first 3 games, but despite that, it kind of felt like it was too early to shove him to the side, because DMC2 was such an abject stinker that the series fans just prefer to pretend it doesn't even exist. And DMC3 somewhat recharacterized him in a way that made him even more interesting than he was in DMC1. Because of this, it felt like he had only one game to truly shine. But that didn't stop director Hideaki Itsuno and the DMC4 team at Capcom from bringing in a young, fresh face anyway. Nero's presence was at first treated with reluctance, or at worst, disdain, not because he was an actual bad character, but because people assumed he was there to completely replace Dante. Thankfully, that ended up being far from the truth, and as more people understood this, opinions on him turned around. Nero was introduced right out the gate as a brash teenage punk who marches to the beat of his own drum, and cares little for authority or formality. But that doesn't mean he's apathetic. Nero still cares deeply for his friends and is always the first person to rush to action when action needs to be taken. Just as with Kiryu and Ichiban, Dante and Nero both have key similarities and differences. Dante is much more laid back and casual, taking things that come at him in stride. In some cases, he may even be flirtatious. But Nero is serious and irritable, sometimes letting his emotions get the better of him. But they're both very arrogant and enjoy mouthing off against their enemies to get under their skin. They both have a strong sense of justice, and even though they both have demon blood running through their veins, they both embrace their human side and love the human world they live in. Dante and Nero are also in a genre of video game that gives them the opportunity to not only contrast their personalities, but also their gameplay. Dante, being a veteran demon hunter, is known for his vast assortment of weapons that players can switch between on the fly, as well as his style switching, a mechanic that basically doubles his moveset for either mobility purposes or with a specific weapon, depending on whether or not he's currently using the corresponding style. Nero, however, is equipped with a few specific weapons that are his and his alone. Blue Rose, a double-barreled revolver, Red Queen, a sword with a combustion engine that can coat itself in flames, and the Devilbringer, Nero's demonic right arm. DMC5 would expand his moveset further by replacing the Devilbringer with a variety of different mechanical arms that can do a variety of different attacks, but in order to switch to a different one, the current one would need to be destroyed. So even with a larger arsenal, Dante remains the only one with several weapons and multiple styles at his disposal whenever and wherever. Now, one discussion that pops up every once in a while is what archetype each character represents, and it's pretty much been decided that Dante is representative of a more metalhead aesthetic, with things like skulls and bats being a regular motif in things related to him, plus the fact that his office is decorated with corpses pinned to the wall with swords, while Nero is more representative of punk, though more in attitude than in visual design. Now, there's also an argument to be made if Virgil, Dante's twin brother, is worth bringing up here, but so far he's exclusively been a DLC or add-on character, despite being the primary antagonist in all of his appearances. I do love him though. My next new main character is probably the most successful one I'll be talking about in this video, both in reception and game sales, but it's for a good reason. Arthur Morgan in Red Dead Redemption 2. 2010's Red Dead Redemption 1 is a tough act to follow. Not only was it an amazing game with a gripping story, it had a fantastic protagonist in John Marston to help propel that story to heights it wouldn't reach without him. He was cool and deadly, but also deeply affected by the dangerous outlaw lifestyle, and showed a clear love for his wife and son. Unlike other initial main characters I've mentioned so far, John only had one game to himself, but it felt like a complete journey. If he only ever had one game, that would be perfectly fine. Despite that, when it was revealed that not only was Redemption 2 being made, but it was also a prequel, of course, people hoped and prayed to play a younger John. But that wasn't the case. We were playing a new, slightly older character who was part of John's old crew under Dutch Vanderland. John would still be present, and you would still talk to him and do missions with him, but he wasn't the main character anymore. At first, this seemed strange, because why not make him the main character again if he's right there? Before the game released, fans of Redemption 1 were wary, and understandably so. John was such a fascinating, complicated powerhouse of a character, it seemed like any other character taking the spotlight after him was being set up for failure. However, almost nobody would expect Arthur Morgan to be such an incredibly deep, complex, emotional character in his own right that one could argue he received an even longer and more conclusive journey than John did. Arthur starts his game as ruthless and brooding, but also capable of dry wit and humor, but he gradually becomes more disillusioned with the life he's led and how it harms the people around him, and how he might deserve the suffering he endures. He experiences a very heavy existential crisis as his faith in his leader, Dutch, starts to deteriorate. And it's a very personal journey that's as gripping as it is painful. Of course, this is helped a lot by the game having a far bigger scope than its predecessor. It's a no-brainer that the protagonist of a 60-hour game would have a more satisfying and emotional arc than the protagonist of a 20-hour game. But the fact that John's journey is still comparable in impact, despite that discrepancy, is a testament to how amazingly realized he is. There is a potential point of criticism that one could aim at the game for ruining Arthur's journey depending on how you play, and that is the dissonance between what you, the player, is doing in your spare time and how the story discusses Arthur as a person. It can be jarring, if not amusing, to run around killing and stealing indiscriminately for hours on end, only to do a story mission that involves Arthur being totally altruistic and being told what a good man he is. Regardless though, in the story that's told through the main missions, Arthur is still the backbone of Red Dead Redemption 2. He has the depth and charisma to outshine the rest of the game's immaculate world design, even when John is also on screen, and that's no easy task. If it was ever possible to write a character who deserved the protagonist spot more than John, it's Arthur, and the love he's amassed from fans since Red Dead Redemption 2's release proves this. Now my final character is going to be breaking the rules established for this video a bit, because this character was 1. Despised when he first showed up, and 2. Reintroduced multiple times, with fans of the franchise gaining a more positive opinion of him each time. He was controversial and remained so for years, unlike all the other characters we discussed so far. I'm talking about Raiden from Metal Gear Solid 2: Sons of Liberty. Raiden was kept a very close secret. It wasn't until the day that the game released that people saw him for the first time, following a really cool opening segment with Solid Snake. Players suddenly found themselves in control of this person they had never seen before, and it wasn't for some brief chapter of the game. It was for the entire rest of it. It's almost hard to overstate how angry some people were at his mere existence when he first showed up in MGS2 all the way back in the early 2000s. That is quite a while ago, so if you're too young to have seen all of this for yourself, believe me when I say that some people were really fucking mad that their familiar and beloved Solid Snake, with his rugged attitude and cool demeanor, was replaced by this young, annoying rookie. Raiden was seen as some asshole pretty boy, and that's putting it lightly. Some people preferred to call him a particular slur. The outrage against him was so bad, some fans took to the forums and even some journalists took to their websites to say that Raiden's existence was enough to hate the Metal Gear series, not just Metal Gear Solid 2. Not everyone disliked him though. At the end of the day, it was still a successful and well-reviewed game. Plenty of fans were receptive to what the narrative was hoping to achieve by telling the story through his more inexperienced eyes instead of Snake's, including me. I was actually quite interested in the main character switch back when I first played the game too. And eventually, as the years passed, MGS2's overall reception would grow to become more positive, and lots of Metal Gear Solid fans now consider it to be the strongest entry in the series, at least thematically. Opinions on Raiden have softened up a lot since then, but it wasn't a fairly quick turnaround. It took years and multiple games for it to happen. Metal Gear Solid 3 Snake Eater would eventually come out and completely blow people away. It had a character that jokingly resembled Raiden, but otherwise he obviously wasn't present in the game, as it took place back in the 60s. However, he made a return in Metal Gear Solid 4 Guns of the Patriots, and his appearance was remarkably different. He was a cyborg ninja, more machine than man. Now, I won't go into the lore specifics of why he's like that, but it was a very drastic and shocking direction for his character to go in that a lot of people were too busy being flabbergasted at to be angry that he returned. In MGS4, he was more of a stone-faced killing machine, capable of dismantling a whole platoon of enemies with ease. He also had a really badass fight with Vamp. In 2010, Famitsu, Japan's most popular gaming magazine, would hold a character poll to see who was everyone's favorite across the entire industry, and Raiden would actually break the top 50. Despite how divisive he was when he first appeared, his second appearance dramatically turned things around. But his journey to become a truly beloved character still wasn't over. In 2013, Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance released, developed by Platinum Games, and it was a game dedicated entirely to Raiden and his ruthless slicing and dicing. Lightning bolt action, it was once advertised as. He even received favorable comparisons to Dante. With Rising's fast-paced hack-and-slash combat and heavily political themes, Raiden was given a darker persona where he embraced the merciless killer that was sleeping inside him, and the sins he's committed. Just like with MGS2, as time went on, people began to appreciate Metal Gear Rising more and more, with the game periodically regaining relevance every couple of years. It's reached the point that Metal Gear Rising was probably the first Metal Gear game for newer franchise fans. Over 3 games and a total genre switch, Raiden went from a resented rookie who couldn't be killed off soon enough to a certified badass that people wish to see again. Like I said before, sometimes a main character switch can be hard to pull off, but as we've seen with my personal favorites that I discussed in this video, there are a few attributes that can help make the transition smooth. It's important for the new and old characters to have their own distinct personalities and struggles, but also have at least somewhat similar morals. Making the new character too different in demeanor can make the switch jarring, and it's important to reassure the audience that the new character is not a replacement for the old one, because some fans will take that as an implication that the old one is inferior or not as interesting or no longer relevant. The optimal new main character is someone who can quickly establish themselves as competent, reliable, and their own person. They're not a shadow of who came before, but simply a new source of light that shines in their own unique way without overpowering their predecessor. I love Ichiban, but I love Kiryu and Majima too. I love Nero, but I still love Dante and Virgil. I love Arthur Morgan, but I still love John Marston. I love Raiden, but I still love Snake. They're all great in their own way, and that's why they're my favorite examples of the torch being passed. This concludes my video on how to introduce new main characters. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you around.